Hi, Nigel Saunders here. We're back for part 2 of bonsai work during March break. Today I'm going to be picking 2 of these 4 trees to plant in my Vietnam style bonsai pots. I'll be using a sponge and cement to create a root over rock type planting typical of the bonsai trees you'd see in Vietnam. I'll also be checking in on some of the trees that I've planted recently to see how they're doing. So all this and more coming up in the Bonsai Zone. I'm going to start the video by taking this sponge and cutting it to fit in the bottom of this pot, and then I'll sculpt it to look like rocks. I'm going to take the sponge and place it in the pot and then just cut around the edges to make it fit. There's one corner cut away, and this corner needs to come off. And this end. So that's getting pretty close. It fits in the pot now, so you can see that. In most of the plantings I've been looking at, the rocks are about equal to the height of the pot. So I'm going to cut this sponge in half, and I can use the other half for this pot. So here I go. I'll cut it down the middle, and the flat surfaces will go towards the bottom of the pot. So I'll try and cut it approximately in the middle here. Again, this will just be rough. We'll do all the final shaping by hand. There we go. So I've got one for this pot and one for this pot. Next, I've got to decide on what kind of terrain I want with the rocks. If I want it like a hill or surrounding the tree so it's in a pocket of soil. So I've got to make some decisions. I don't want the 2 plantings to look the same, so I'm going to try a different style on each one. To sculpt the foam, I'm just going to pick at it with my hand to get a rough, kind of rocky texture and shape it exactly how I want. For this chunk of foam, I'm going to have a hill in the middle, so I'm going to taper away the sides like that. So this will be the highest point. If this is too low in the pot, I can always put soil underneath it and raise it up. I'm saving all my leftover pieces in case I want to make some additional rocks. I've got the first rock contoured. You can see the shape of it. And I've got room around the edges so the roots can grow over the rock and into the soil. So it'll sit up about, maybe about here. Rock number 2 is going to be more like a tree on a cliff. So I'll have a steep edge, and I'll cut out a pocket for the soil in the middle. Here's my rock number 2 done. It's got a hole in it for the roots to go down into the soil, and it'd be like a cliff face going around. So quite different from the first one. I've raided the recycling bin to find some containers to mix the cement up in. The cement I'm using is hydraulic cement. You can buy this at the hardware store. It's just a cement that dries underwater. So it's a little better than regular cement for this type of work. I'm going to start by cementing up the hill or the mountain type rock. So I'll open my cement up and put some in my mixing tray. I don't know how much I'll need, but we'll try that amount for starters. And I'll add some water. So a little bit at first, and I'll kind of stir it as I go. You don't want it too thin and you don't want it too thick. A little more water. So that's getting to a nice consistency. It's like a paste-like. So then I'm just going to start spatulaing it on to my rock. like this. And the water will soak into the rock and it'll make it quite solid. And we will need a few coats on this. But hopefully, in the end, we'll get sort of a realistic looking rock finish to it. That's soaking in quite nicely. So I'm going to have to mix up some more cement. I have more cement mixed up now, so I'll continue along, trying to cover the whole rock. I used a dry sponge, and I'm hoping the sponge absorbs, the watery cement, so it kind of makes it very rigid. If I wet the sponge first, the cement might stick quite nicely to it, but it wouldn't soak in. The cement wouldn't soak into the middle of the sponge, so I'm hoping this technique works. We'll see. The first coat is done on my hill-type rock. I am going to cement the bottom also, just to make it even more rigid, but I'll let the top kind of cure first, and then I'll flip it over and do the bottom. In the meantime, I'll go on to my rock number 2. I've got more cement mixed up now, so here I go with rock number 2. Sort of the cliff face. So I'm just putting cement all around the edges. The cement sticks really well to the sponge. It's a good surface to attach cement onto. I mean, it can chip and break, but usually enough of the cement soaks through into the sponge that you don't notice any discoloration if it does chip. Whereas if you used a styrofoam base or something, the cement will chip right off and you'll see the white styrofoam underneath. And it looks very obvious that it's not a real rock. But the sponge seems to work well. I've got my first coat of cement on my sponge forms, so I'm going to let that set and dry a bit, and then I'll come back and touch it up with a second coat, and I'll do the bottoms. While we're waiting for that first coat of cement to dry, let's have a look at some of the trees and get some updates. My first update is my pink pixie Bougainvillea forest. All the trees have sprouted, except for this one. It has a little shoot down below, but the top has died off. So I think it'll live. I think this little shoot's going to come out. If it doesn't, we have 3 trees, which is a good number. And as I said, I can always plant more cuttings in this forest to increase the density of trees if I want. I am going to prune the top off the tree just to let some of these other branches catch up in vigor. So I'm just going to cut the very tip off here, just like that. And the rest will be fine. This forest has just started life as a bonsai forest. It'll be a lot of fun developing the trees over the summer. Here's a look at some of the pink pixie Bougainvillea cuttings. There's a few that didn't survive, but most of them did quite well. Julian's Bougainvillea has recovered from the repotting and is growing really well again. The Ficus cutting of a cutting has recovered from its repotting and it's growing really well also. The 2 other Bougainvilleas that I planted recently are also both growing really well. The first coat of cement on my 2 sponge rocks is dry enough that I think I can flip it over and put a light coat of cement on the bottom now. Okay, that's looking good. So I'm going to start on my first rock here, and I'm going to spread that on the bottom. I like the hydraulic cement too because you don't have to buy a great big bag of it and store it around the house. It comes in convenient little tub sizes. Kind of a good for a hobby size. You're making rocks and things. So that's looking pretty good on the bottom. So I would say that one's done. I'm going to set that aside to dry. And we'll go on to our other sponge. I might have to mix up some more cement. I'm getting kind of low here. Definitely we'll need some more. That looks good. Okay, here I go. We'll finish this bottom off here. just like frosting a cake. Okay, we'll set that aside to dry also. The first coat of cement is almost dry on the stones, so it's time to add coat number 2. For the next coat, I'm going to try and start to get more details. Maybe some sort of steps and plateaus in the rock to try and make it look more miniature. Just going to spray it a bit. It'll help it all stick together better. This was the side I didn't like. It was too rounded looking. There's coat number 2 on this rock. I think it's looking a lot better, looking more natural. So I'm ready to put coat number 2 on my other rock. So this is supposed to look like a little cliff face here. Spray a little more water in there. We'll get this concrete to stiffen the sponge up. Yeah, that's looking quite good. As the concrete dries, you can play with it and move it around a bit. Or the cement, I should say. All your tools can just be cleaned up with water before the cement dries. And you just give it a wipe with a cloth. That's good as new. So I'm going to let those thoroughly dry overnight, and I'll start work on them again tomorrow morning. We're back now for day 2 of planting trees in my Vietnam style bonsai pots. I've been looking at my 2 rocks, and I think what they need is like some other stones around it. So maybe, you know, if I break off a chunk, I can stick a stone here, you know, maybe one up here, just to break it up so it doesn't look like it's all one piece. So I'm thinking of something like this as an arrangement, kind of adding some more pieces to it to kind of break up that flat look of the rock. So I'll get the cement mixed up, add our water to it. It's looking pretty good. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to get these new sponges and give them a good soaking in cement. Roll them around in the tray, making sure they have lots of cement soaked into them. That looks pretty good. And then I'll put a bit more cement on them, and we'll stick them down on top of the existing rocks, which I'll give those a wet just so the cement sticks better. Yeah, so we'll give the rocks, just wet the surface of the concrete, and then I'll spread a layer of cement on where I'm going to stick the new rocks down like that. And here I go. So that new rock will be stuck down. Now I'll get this one all ready, and it will be stuck down. And the little one here, give that some cement, and we'll stick it down here. And then I'm going to continue building up my layers of cement here, trying to improve the contour each time. I've got that coat done on this rock, so I'll set it aside to dry. And I'll start working on this one. I finished the next coat on my second rock, so I'll set that aside to dry also. I'm going to be doing a root pruning demo at this week's bonsai meeting, and I was going to use a larch tree, but they're still frozen outside. It's too cold to repot them yet. So I'm going to pick an indoor tree, and I think it'll be my Ficus Fancy. This is the tree I'll be repotting. It's a Ficus microcarpa, and it was last repotted in July of 2015, so just over 2 years ago. The top of this tree has gotten quite wild and bushy, so before I go and repot it, I'm going to prune the top. With this umbrella style canopy, the first thing I always do is pick a height of the canopy on the tree. So I usually put my hand in front of the tree and kind of gauge how high I want to prune the top down. So I'm going to put my hand down now, and I'm thinking maybe somewhere about there. Yeah, so that gives me an idea of where to prune the top of the canopy. I'm going to start by pruning my apex down here. So I wanted my height to be about here. So I'll just start pruning the top away here. Starting high, and I can always go down lower if I think I've left too much foliage on top. I want the tree to flow from the roots up the trunk and then up into the canopy. So a nice smooth kind of curve. There is one branch here that I think is too low that I think I'll need to remove. That one right there. It kind of spoils that flow line, and it's too abrupt. It doesn't flow into that nice smooth curve. So I'm going to remove this branch. All right, so here I go. Come here and off it goes. There's another skinny little branch right here that kind of crosses the main trunk here. I've removed a dead part before. There was a dead stump there, so I'm going to remove the rest of that branch just like that. That'll also clean up the flow lines a bit here. The branches flow nicely now from the roots, curving up into the upper canopy. But I want to check all my other views, my side views and my back view, to make sure they all flow from all the different angles. So let's give the tree a spin now. There's our side view. This branch is a bit of a, doesn't look the greatest in this side view, but it's, I don't want to get rid of it. It looks nice in the front view. So the back view now, looking okay. This branch is kind of low. I think I should remove that, so I will. Here I go. That's removed. The rest look pretty good. There's a dead stump here. I gotta get rid of that. Like that. I've got a branch here that kind of comes up and then it does some funny dividing. I wonder if it would look better without that. Maybe I'll just prune it off shorter. We'll see what happens with that. Okay, I think that's good for the branch pruning for now. I'll continue pruning the upper canopy now. Getting rid of crossing branches like this one. I want to get that rounded canopy to the top of the tree now. So there's so many branches, I think I'm going to come in and do a hedge style pruning. Just cut through everything to get the right profile. And what dies back, I'll fix up later. But this will get the overall shape of the canopy in check. I'm stepping back now, having a look at the tree from the distance. It's looking pretty good. I like the rounded canopy. I'm a little dense over on the right-hand side. I think a little more pruning there. Now let's see how that looks. That looks better. Looks a little more balanced. The tree still looks quite natural. Yeah, I think that'll do for the canopy. When I go to repot the tree, I'm going to fix a lot of these roots that are coming down and crossing in front of others. So I'll either try and straighten them out to the side here or move them. There's one kind of root or trunk here that's getting a little thick. So in future I may have to split that, carve a groove down the center to divide it into two. I think it's okay for now, but in future I'll keep a watch on that. That'll just keep swelling and getting bigger. So there's some roots that are separated out front here. I can fit my finger behind them. That could probably be removed. There's good roots underneath them. There's no point having roots hanging out in the air unless they're dropping down from the branches. Most of the roots near the trunk of a ficus at the base are quite flush with the base of the tree. They don't come out in the air like that. So I think that kind of spoils the illusion of scale, or spoils the miniature look of the tree having roots coming out in the air like that. So I may be able to correct them by, repositioning them closer to the trunk. So we'll see with those. Another crossing root that maybe can be fixed here. So yeah, all that'll come at our club meeting when I go and repot this tree. As I look back at some of the earlier pictures of this tree, it always reminds me of the progress the trees make over the years. It's kind of nice to see your tree developing. You don't notice it day to day, but when you look back at pictures, you can see the dramatic changes. I'll try and videotape the repotting of this tree at our club meeting. If I don't get a chance, I'll show you the after pictures on the next video. I'll get my fancy styled ficus back on the bench now, and we'll continue work with our Vietnam style bonsai pots. I'm still waiting for the cement to dry, so I walked up to our local library and picked up my latest 3D printed bonsai stand. Here's a close-up of the stand. It's got a classic Chinese kind of scroll type feet on it. The little miniature Sarissa forest is growing well. There's a few branches that died off here, but the main leader is growing quite well. There's a weed in here I can get rid of. And the moss needs a bit of pruning. It's starting to grow up the trunks here. Like I said, these small forests need a lot of work. They can quickly grow out of shape, and so if you like working on trees, these miniature ones are ideal. If you like to be pruning all the time and keeping them looking good. I'm going to put this back on the bench, and we'll see how our rocks are doing now. My two sponge rocks are dry now, so the next step is I'm going to paint them so it seals in the cement so the lime doesn't leach out into the water and affect the trees. I'll start the painting by giving the rocks a coat of gray primer. Okay, so here I go. Rock number 1 is all painted. I still have to turn it over and paint the bottom, but I'll do that for the next coat. And I'm going to go on to rock number 2. I've got both of the rocks painted with gray primer, so I'll let those dry, then I'll flip them over and paint the bottom side. I'm sure there'll be someone out there that's wondering, well, why don't I just use real rocks? The problem with real rocks is they get really heavy quickly. If I had, a buildup of real rocks in this planter, it would weigh a lot. I could lift it fine, but, it just makes it hard to handle. Especially if you get in some of the bigger plantings, it gets really difficult to move the pot with the tree and the rocks by yourself. You almost need 2 people on some of the larger ones. So, yeah, I could use real rocks in this planting, but it gets awkward. When you move them, the mass of the rock tends to shift in the pot. You could attach it, but it just makes it really heavy. While I wait for the paint to dry on the rocks, I'm going to start preparing the pots for planting. So I'm going to put screens in the bottom and put a small layer of bonsai soil in the bottom of each pot. Then the rock will go on top, and then some more soil, and then finally the tree. I'm just going to use one big piece of screen in the bottom of the pot. So I'll cut it here. And this is just ordinary window screening. It's like a nylon plastic window screening. And it works quite well. There we go. So there's one screen cut and fitted to the bottom of the pot. Both pots have their window screen in now, so I'll add a shallow layer of bonsai soil, and I'll get my spoon to level the soil off. That looks good, and then I'll give the soil a watering to hold it in place while I'm planting everything. So here I go. The soil's sucking up all the water. I've placed the 2 rocks in the pots now, and I don't really like them. I think they're too high. So I'm going to dig out the soil and try and lower them down in the pot. I might have to take the soil right out, put the rock in the bottom of the pot, and then put the soil around it. I just think there's too much rock and not enough pot. I've lowered this rock down, and I think it looks a lot better. A little less rock and more pot. My next step for the rocks will be to put a black light wash over the rock to bring out the details. I've got a wash of black mixed up, so I'll start to paint it on. And then I can use more thinner to kind of get it to run into all the cracks. This is the enamel model paint that I'm using. Just making sure I get into all the cracks and crannies. And I think that looks good. There's a view of the rock now. It's starting to look more realistic. I'll start adding the wash to the second rock now. I finished my second rock now with the black wash on it. So we got to let that dry again. Here's a shot of my first rock in the pot, so you can kind of see the effect of that black wash on the rock Time has flown by today. I got my rocks made and partially painted, but I think we're going to have to continue this planting of these Vietnam-style bonsai pots in part 3. I'm Nigel Saunders. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time here in the Bonsai Zone.